I'll call the Monday, July 31st Public Safety Building Committee meeting to order. It's currently 6:38. Most of our committee is present. Mr. Lyons, Mr. Goodney, and Mr. Officer are absent. We do have a quorum. Before rolling into the first order of business, just a few updates for the committee. At the last Board of Selectmen's meeting, they voted to change the charge of this committee to make the advisory member, Ms. Cook, a voting member. So Ms. Cook will now be participating in all of our votes as well as count towards a quorum. They also appointed Mr. Officer, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us tonight, but will be joining us at our next scheduled meeting. I'll let him do an introduction of himself and his background when he joins us then. The first order of business is approval of 3 different sets of meeting minutes. I'll go in order of the meetings that occurred to see if there's any discussion or edits from the committee members. The first was the July 6th meeting minutes. Are there, Mr. Wood?
Found a couple of edits on, I'm sorry about that. I found a couple of edits on page 2. Down on item 8, it says Jason Malinowski went over 3 options to rate the 7 applicants. It was just doubled on it. I assume he didn't mean to have it doubled. And then on the next paragraph down there, the remaining 5 companies were discussed at great length, and it said on committee, and it just was one, just a couple of typos. That's all I saw.
Okay. Are there any other edits proposed by the committee? Is there a motion on the July 6th minutes?
I make a motion to accept the July 6 minutes as amended with those changes.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? All opposed?
I'm not going to vote yet because I wasn't voting.
Okay.
I know that she was the loser, but I didn't read them either.
All right,
I'm
so we'll
just-
mark
I'm
you down as
abstaining.
an abstention, okay? I am jotting down notes over here, but if there, Mr. Wood, you have your computer, so if you wouldn't mind taking the minutes in Mr. Lyons' absence.
My computer's possessed, so I'll take them both.
Okay.
I apologize. What time did you call to work?
6:38. I got that written down from here on out. The next item is July 10th, which was the interviews of the OPM. Any edits or discussions on those? Is there a motion on those?
I make a motion to accept the minutes as written. I didn't see any edits. Did anybody else?
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor? Ms. Cook abstaining. July 18th meeting minutes. Any edits to those?
I've got one small one. So under 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th bullet on item 1. I almost don't like, I mean, I did almost say this, but not exactly this way, but it's okay. A female will not get cozy with the as contractors and their contracts. Sorry. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet, change the word in the last sentence there to contractors and not contracts.
Any further? Mr. Wood?
Yeah, I found one silly thing. On the second bullet said each committee was asked to state, so it should be each committee member.
Any further edits? Is there a motion to accept the minutes as edited?
I'll just keep it easy to write down. I make a motion to accept the July 18th minutes with the amendments made by Ms. Cook and myself.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? And one abstention. Next order of business is a update on the OPM contract. So, as you're all aware, at our last meeting, we recommended the Vertex companies. The selectmen the following evening ratified that recommendation and awarded the contract, subject to contract negotiations. The committee nominated Mr. Rooney and Ms. Cook to have a discussion with Vertex and come back to this committee. I'll defer to one of them to outline the details of the meeting, but you really have two items in front of you. One was a budget that they had prepared in advance of the meeting with Mr. Rooney, Ms. Cook, and Mr. Purple. And the second is a contract. I'd say we come back to the contract after Mr. Rooney and Ms. Cook kind of walk through the dynamics of the meeting, observations, and anything else that they think would be worthwhile updating the committee on. And then we'll work our way through the contract itself. So Mr. Rooney, Ms. Cook, I don't know if any of you want to take the lead on an update?
I'll start and you can chime in when I miss stuff. So, we met with John, and I think you say it Lemieux. Mark Purple was there, and Jason was on the phone last Wednesday morning. John wasn't at the interview because he was on vacation with his daughter, so this was the first time to meet him. So he came by himself. So he is the project executive. So he was the one that basically represented Vertex that morning. So long story short, if you take a look at the spreadsheet everybody has here, that's pretty much what we focused on. So just to kind of give you some subjective information, he seemed really knowledgeable, wants to do this job, was able to answer all questions very easily. He didn't get stumped on anything. So what we decided might be the better way to pursue this is to basically sign a contract to basically cover the first 4 areas you see on this. There's 5 here, so everything through the end of pre-qualification and bidding. And then at that point, sign an addendum to the contract to basically pick up the biggest part of the contract, which is the construction and closeout. So most of the money is in that last part. We did that because we wanted to get this done and felt that that'd be the quickest way to, or one of the quickest way to get it done. They're strictly a time and material shop, so whatever hours they spend, they're gonna bill us, and the billing rates are here. They start at 165 and go down to 95. The 95 is your clerk, who will spend most of his time on that last phase, so you won't see much of him until we get to the last phase. It's Steve and John that will be very involved in the first 4 phases, along with that middle column. And the reason you see 1, 2, 3, 4 names there is because they all have various subspecialties. Because we asked, why can't we have Kevin for that whole section? And the answer is, well, because Kevin doesn't know MEP, and he doesn't know civil. So Kirby is what they call the front-end person. Scalzo is the MEP guy. Heffernan, the guy, so that's the guy we met at the interview that we liked so much, it's set to the right. He is fire. And then Bates is a civil engineer, so she does the civil part of it. So that's why they have that split up, because of their various individual specialties. We don't know who the clerk of the works is going to be. We won't know till it gets closer. They haven't assigned that. We tried to find out, but he just don't know. So that we'll know that once time gets closer. A couple things that we asked that I thought were interesting. He said, get going with your architect right now. You can't sign the contract maybe, but there's no reason, if you think we're going to stick with the same architect, not to go ahead and call him, tell him that's probably the route we're going to go. We haven't voted yet, but go ahead and start getting your proposal together. He said you really don't want to waste a minute at this point, and you're going to waste some time if you don't start that process right now. So he suggested we go ahead and call them and let them know that it appeared that we were leaning toward selecting them. It's not formal yet, but they should go ahead and start getting their ducks in a row so that they don't waste any time on that. He said we should expect when time comes to receive about 4 qualified bids from the general contractor. He thinks that their firm will probably know all 4 of them or have worked with them, so they'll know something about them. He did explain that the total reason there is such a difference in cost between a municipal project and a non-municipal project is totally because of the requirement to use prevailing wage, which is not unions, it's prevailing wage. There's no other difference. So he said that explains it. He doesn't expect to have a problem with unions out here. And this is important. We've got to form a committee called a pre-qualification committee. Help me here, Mark. Pre-qualification committee, and we have to have 2 members on that committee. And he didn't make it clear whether they have to be from this committee or just from the town. So we've got to appoint two members, and I looked it up, and he's right. So there's got to be two members there. So we've got to get that done. He clarified that the permitting process will be done not by them, but mostly by the architectural team, as far as sitting town meetings, and answering questions. So he said, we'll be there if you need us, but that's really not their lead on that one. Now this is important. So everybody, if you look at your spreadsheet, you're gonna see in the very last column, subcontractor, there's 2 numbers, 12,000 and 16,000. So that's their outside estimator that they use. Remember that Daedalus was the only one that had an internal estimator. Everybody else uses someone outside. You don't have to do this, but when they do it, they use a company called PM&C, and this is PM&C's actual bids. And you don't have to do both of these. These are basically doing the same thing. You do it once, a little bit earlier, then you do it again later. So we talked about that, and it seemed like we concluded that we don't have to do but one of these. And if we do one, we should do the first one, but do it a little bit later than he's got it up there. So that would knock, $16,000 out of this total right off the top. We did spend some time trying to negotiate a little bit. But he was pretty firm, it is what it is. These are our billing rates. If we spend the time, this is what your bill is going to be. Now, what he did offer to do on these first 4 sections was to basically add up the 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, subtract the $28,000 for the subcontractor, and basically sign this contract in front of you as a not to exceed. So actual hours are not to exceed. So we at least have a cap on the first part. We don't have a cap on the last part. I mean, it's still $100,000 out of 500, so still only 20% of the total we expect to pay, but at least will give us a cap on the first part of this. So then what we said is, do you have a contract that we can use so we don't have to start all over? So he said, yes, I can come up with a contract. So that was Wednesday. So we got it Thursday, Mark, I think? You got the contract from John on Thursday, the proposed contract? Yeah, so he turned it around pretty fast, and this is the Westborough contract for their public safety building that they used. So it's probably 2010 or so. The dates on the files are 2010, that's why I think it's 2010. Yeah, so he used it, so he did what we asked.
This is Westboro, you said?
Yeah. So, and they did the same thing we're proposing to do, which is basically sign an agreement to cover the first 4 phases and then retain the ability to do an addendum or amendment to add the construction phase. So he sent a contract that they did what we're proposing to do. Okay, so that's the contract that you've got in front of you, which is why I think there's so many omitted, and this was because they had stuff in here that really wasn't relevant to what they were trying to do. So we got the contract on Thursday. I think Jason's seen it, Mark's seen it, I've seen it, and John's seen it. That's it? You guys haven't seen it, right? Okay, so it kind of looks like an AI contract, Mike, but I don't think it is. I actually looked to see if it was. I don't think it is, but it looks like one. So anyway, we got the proposed contract. I think Aldo has it too. I don't think he's commented at this point. So John Rooney sent back some, so Mark filled in some blanks. John Rooney then suggested some edits that went back to Vertex, which apparently they've said yes to. I've got a few more specific things and then kind of a big thing. So that's kind of where we are tonight.
I think before we go to the contract, Mr. Rooney, do you have anything to add?
Yeah,
to
well, I
that?
think Kathy pretty much summarized the entire meeting that took over an hour and a half. She summarized it almost word for word within 5 minutes. The only thing I would add is that meeting Mr. Lamoureux or Lemieux confirmed, at least in my mind, and I suspect it would have confirmed in the committee's mind, that we made the right choice. He was very professional, and as much as we like Mr. Theron and Mr. Heffernan, I'm confident that this committee will be and would have been equally as comfortable with Mr. Lemieux. One thing we spent some time with is what I perhaps incorrectly referred to, but I would say it again, is what appeared to be some duplicative hours, duplicative effort between Mr. Lemieux and Mr. Theron, and he assured us, and I think we made it clear to him, that, we're not gonna stand for duplicative efforts, or duplicative attendance at meetings unless it's necessary. And I do think he understood that, and he, heard that loud and clear. And so rather than try and negotiate the number down at that meeting, we went to the agreement that Kathy referenced, not to exceed, and it will be on a time and hourly basis. So I do think it was a productive meeting, and it accomplished everything we wanted to have it accomplish.
And I think it's important for the committee to know that some of the sample contracts that we had seen from other communities indicated that they were going in on more of a, I'll call it a fixed fee basis. So it was one number for the entire scope of work. What this arrangement does, at least in my opinion, is it gives us some flexibility with the personnel that they're bringing out, such that there would not be necessarily duplicative activities that we're paying for, and gives us kind of the right to voice feedback along the way in terms of what resources are appearing when. We obviously have to trust their judgment on who they're bringing out to what meetings, but I think there will be opportunities to eliminate certain areas of duplication if the need arises, depending upon the needs that we have, which quite honestly are still a little unforeseen of what obstacles we may encounter along the way. So I guess before moving on to the contract, are there any questions from committee members that weren't present at that discussion that you'd like answered before we kind of go into some more of the finer details? Mr. Moorhead?
Can I just ask why we're splitting out construction and the closeout? What was the thought? Or where'd that come from, suggestion-wise, or?
To basically keep them honest, and let them know that they don't, there's no surety they're gonna get the last part unless we're happy with the first part. So I don't see any downside to doing that. So that was kind of my driver, is to see how they're gonna work, see how it works out, and then make sure we really made the right decision. So we really have another chance to rethink this. No one thinks we're gonna do anything differently. But that was my thought process, as just, let's, it's $100,000, let's just get going, and then we can see how we think they do, and then decide we want to amend the contract or not.
Okay.
I'd just add, Mike, that I was of the mindset that we should just do the whole contract at once rather than splitting it up. But what we got from them was a commitment that the rate schedule in here will be the rate schedule when we renegotiate the second part.
Throughout
So that
construction,
addressed
okay.
that
Yeah,
concern.
the hourly rates are the hourly rates, so they agreed to that.
Okay.
Any further questions on that piece? So the Board of Selectmen are holding an administrative meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. One of the agenda items for that meeting is to approve the contract subject to final council review, which would be town council. But as we go through this, you'll see at least one point that's going to require Vertex to go back to their council on an item. So what I thought would be good for the benefit of the committee is to kind of walk through the contract. Mr. Rooney, you're welcome to take the lead, or we can just go by your comments, but there was a markup provided to Vertex. They came back and, I guess I'll use the words, substantially accepted most of the changes, but there are some items that are open that I'm happy to walk through, and I think if the committee has a view one way or another, we could list those particular caveats out. I think the overarching premise is we don't want to box ourselves into a corner, but at the same time, we have a need to get the OPM on board. So I don't know if anyone has any preference on the format that we go through this. Do you want to go with Mr. Rooney's comments and, address those that have not been accepted? The basis for the template, just for everyone's, this wasn't Westboro. Westboro didn't come up with this template. This was a basis that is used by many other municipalities, so Vertex has used this contract many times. Of course, every town customizes it to their needs. That's why you see a few omitted items here and there. Any preference on how we go through this?
So I've got some comments too that you haven't seen, and John hadn't seen, and obviously Vertex hadn't seen, so I don't care what, and I don't think they're redundant, but they might be. I read through John's real fast, so I may have missed something he said.
Why don't we go through your comments first? And then what we'll do is we'll come back to the highlighted comment boxes on the documents in front of us. So if you just want to list out the section that you're referring to.
Well, let me just give you my big picture comment first. To me, the most important sections are 4, 7, and 8. 4 is what they're supposed to be doing, that's responsibilities. 7 is what they're getting paid, and 8 is what we're calling basic services. So John, the basic services, that's capitalized term, that's what they're using on the back, what the money goes. So I think that, to me, 4 and 8 should actually be together. I mean, it sounds like they're only gonna do in 8 when you look at the money back there, but they're really supposed to do 4 too. So I had a little trouble trying to make sure 4 and 8 really were what they're gonna do. And maybe Aldo's gonna say, no, it's fine. It's clear, they've signed it, they say they gotta do that, so they still have to do that too. Or maybe the 4 really relates more to the last section here, and that's why they didn't really focus on that as a basic service. And maybe they left some of the things in 4 out of 8 on purpose, because they really were trying to focus on 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I just had trouble trying to make sure 4 was part of 8. So that's the general comment. Then specifically, and this is really picky, but I hate this when people add on 10% to cost. So I wouldn't agree to that, but I don't think we're gonna have many of those anyway. So the section where they're talking about reimbursements in 10, I just don't think there's gonna be much of it. They're not charging us for mileage and things like that. These are things that they really pay for out of pocket, that are expenses that we gotta reimburse them, but they're gonna add 10% onto it. So I guess I'd say if we're gonna leave it in there, let's just make sure we don't have much of that, so we pay for them ourselves, so that they don't.
So I have an update on that. They've agreed to remove the 10% in
So that was one of your
section
comments, John?
10.1.
Okay, good. All right, so never mind. Sorry.
And I'll give some more background on that when we,
What was that just being moved? I apologize.
That is Article
10.1.
10.1, they've agreed to remove the add-on to the actual out-of-pocket expenses that we need to pay them for, but again, I don't think there's gonna be many. Then there's one, and John brought this up too, what did they say about the minutes? Because we agreed that they're not taking minutes, that the architect is going to take the minutes for all the meetings. So in here it says they're going to.
so I guess, are there anything that, I guess just to try to keep it in order, are there any comments outside of what Mr. Rooney articulated, other than those things?
I read real fast, so I'm not trying to be redundant on purpose. So
No,
you
I know, I'm
say,
just
he's
gonna-
already addressed it and
Yeah,
shut me up.
so, on the meeting minutes, which was section 8.1.3, they had something in here saying they were gonna take the meeting minutes, but, one of the benefits that Mr. Rooney and Ms. Cook had was, at the original meeting, they said they weren't gonna take meeting minutes. So, where we are at is they view that the meeting minutes, once we get into certain aspects of design, should be done by the designer, i.e. the architect, and that they would more review them for completeness. The way that it has been reworded is they will take minutes, and it is incorporated in their budget for any of the meetings that they come to. The one thing we're gonna have to just make sure we have a very clear path around is, we as a committee have requirements under the open meeting law of, furnishing minutes to the town clerk. So I can see a situation, and we had this when we were going through feasibility, is the architect will submit, or the OPM will submit his or her minutes. We then need to incorporate those into our master minutes, because we're gonna take actions potentially on items outside of conversations with them. You know, a basic example may be an action we need to undertake with the future golf course committee that doesn't necessarily impact anything they're doing, but is a action that we need to take. So we will be getting meeting minutes. I think we need to clarify at a kickoff meeting exactly who's doing what and have assigned ownership at each meeting, but they will be taking minutes of any meeting that they're sitting in, just as a matter of due course. It's just a matter of the level of those minutes and do they rise to meeting kind of our open meeting law requirements.
Will we be posting those as, will we be posting those with our meetings after we finally get them onto our
We're gonna
website
have
with the
to.
town clerk?
It's gonna
As
be-
a addendum?
We're gonna have to, because it's gonna be a document referenced during our meeting, right? So very much like certain pieces of paper that we get and analyze, those are gonna be attachments to our meeting minutes. So so if done properly, we may be able to say, see OPM's project report for the week ending, and that would encompass the construction update or the design update, and then we come back to,
As
Other
reference
items.
documents. Gotcha.
yeah, I don't envision John Lyons cutting and pasting certain parts in, like, we should be able to find a clean cut. It's just, I think, something we need to work through. But they will be doing more than they said they were gonna be doing, which I think is always a plus.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Then my last comment is a general comment, hopefully not redundant too, but there's a lot of things in here that really don't apply. We're further along down the process. They keep talking about feasibility and schematics, et cetera, so I don't think you need to take it out, but it's just not applicable. They're not gonna be doing anything with feasibility and reviewing the site, whatever, so, but I think it's fine leaving it in there.
Okay.
But we don't want to leave it in just for the, I mean, do we want to leave it in? What if we go with a different architect? What if we have to go through everything again and we don't have them secured for that missing phase?
Well, it's in there. I didn't say take it out, so it's in there. It's just, I don't think they're gonna do it if we continue down the path we think we are, but you're right, it's
Yeah,
there.
but who's all the crossed out? What's all the crossed out?
Yeah,
We
so,
just haven't accepted?
so,
Everything's crossed out?
so let's do this. Let's start with, section 3. So my recommendation would be if they have accepted a deletion, which would have been a minor comment for Mr. Rooney, my thought is we proceed. And we talk about some of the items that I would consider open, unless the committee would like to kind of go item by item. All right, so if we're gonna follow that approach, then our first item comes at item 8.1.3, which was the meeting minutes. Is everyone satisfied with the update that I provided and how that is worded within here? So it's on page 10.
But what are you doing? You're just striking, OPM shall take minutes of all design progress meetings.
Yeah, so one,
Just design, not construction.
correct.
I'd almost want to make them responsible for it, even if we get to our initial meeting and say, who's responsible for the meeting minutes for this phase, or who's responsible for the meeting minutes of this phase? Put it on the OPM to be responsible to manage the entire process for the next 30 months.
Well,
Because
there's
this is
difference
only given to
between
them.
taking minutes and making sure they get done.
I understand. So if we, I just want the onus all on them to make sure that they're done throughout the entire process. And if they take them for design, that's fine, but they could also push that responsibility to the architect, which could happen.
So I guess
Give them the
this is probably the
option.
best question answered by you is in terms of when you're going through construction,
It's
who
probably the
typically-
contractor, yeah. It's probably the contractor, but
contractor,
contractor making the meeting minutes. But currently, what if the contractor comes to us and says, we're not taking meeting minutes? I mean, I don't know, in the municipal world.
I think all we're dealing with in this contract for today is the
through design.
is it basically through the bidding process.
Where there's no contractor involved yet.
Right. Yeah,
So really, the onus is gonna be
but it's all
on,
on them for just design. Okay.
and
So,
then
Mike,
we,
don't architects take a lot of minutes at meetings too?
Correct, and nobody wants to. I mean, that's,
Yeah, that.
I mean, we just want the decisions out of it, you know? But somebody's got to do it, because yes, we need it. But if this puts the onus on them for what we're contracting them through, I think that's fine.
they seemed agreeable to whatever we ask, I think,
I mean, this is
Yeah.
it. This is why we're getting them.
yeah.
Okay.
So is everyone comfortable with the wording on meeting minutes? All right, so I'm gonna go to page 11. Just a note, the standard contract in 8.1.3 monthly progress report called for a 12th day of the month report. Mr. Rooney changed that to 10th day. They've agreed to that. And then at the bottom, there was a comment related to any other matters we added and any other matters requested by owner. They thought that that was a little broad, and they added the words, "and any other matter any other reasonable matter requested by the owner." Anyone think that's an unreasonable change?
No, I think it is reasonable.
All right, so then we go to section 8.2, which is on page 12. This goes to the conversation, they have a whole section here on feasibility and schematic design, which, in our view, that is done. That was done prior to town meeting. It is currently struck through in this entire document. I seem to have heard maybe two different views on this. One is keep it in case we need it, but I think we're gonna have a broader issue if we need to go back to that phase. So I guess, is there any reason to keep it in that anyone can foresee up here?
Again, only if we don't go with context, which we aren't discussing yet,
Well, that will be our next agenda item.
so.
So, should we need a design selection process, right, we could bring this back in, right? We could do it as an addendum, right? So let's just say, even if the committee was comfortable going with context and contract negotiations fell through, we can always come back to this and add it as an addendum. But I think all their budgeting materials have assumed no design selection process.
And so in here, then, what do we want the OPM to do for fee negotiation with the architect?
I think that would be covered later on. Wouldn't it be under basic services?
I guess did it get struck out?
I mean, they have to conduct that process if we were to go with context.
Says, they have to.
I don't know, John, if you have a view, but that may be covered by 8.1.1.
Well, 8.1.1, if we strike feasibility study, schematic design, then we gotta bring it back for this to read wherever we start them. If it's DD or,
What was that, Mike?
8.1.1, nothing's changed here. The OPM shall prepare a communication document control procedure during the feasibility study schematic design phase, which is what we're saying we're gonna strike in 8.2. But we should still let them control that preparation, communication document control for whatever phase we start the project up at.
So, Mike, do you consider that the schematic design phase done at this point if we stay with the same architects?
I think we're through light schematic design. I think I think they're gonna go back and do another schematic design package. So there is some schematic design that I see happening. It may not be as heavy as a new architect, but I think they'll do something. I mean, they did a couple drawings. So yes, I think they will. Sorry, I don't
Mr.
wanna
Purple, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. Is there any harm to leaving it in to avoid having to reword some sections under the understanding that this committee knows that nothing was budgeted for those particular items? The feasibility and schematic design section that was struck, is there a viewpoint for ease of contract administration to keep that in to avoid having to reterm a lot of the items in here, with the understanding that for this committee, that included in the fee estimate, there was nothing for that phase?
I think that it's easy enough to do an amendment if you find that you need the service. The same way that you would have to do an amendment if you're adding in any of the services not included in the basic.
So where does that leave us? Mr. Rooney, did I hear you thought it should be struck?
Thought was, when I was reviewing this initially, it was that the schematic design had already been done. So in all honesty, I didn't concentrate at all on that section. What Mike is saying is that maybe part of the schematic design has been done, there may be another part of the schematic design, in which case we have not incorporated it into the cost estimate. So essentially, we have to go back, I would think, if we're gonna include that as part of their work to do, they're gonna obviously wanna be compensated for it.
Unless they skip straight from initial phase to design development.
What,
that's what
what
they're
would be the
assuming.
purpose of doing any more schematic design work? And just, why wouldn't we just go right to the design phase? We have the piece of land, we know the piece of land that we're targeting to put the building on. We know the needs.
Again, I'm just still hung up on the fact that we've not selected Context as our architect, and that's, as of this point today, where we are.
So if we don't select context, though, I guess, is there any reason not to go with Mr. Purple's suggestion of doing an addendum down the road if we need to conduct design selection? Because then we need to agree to them on rates and hours, of what that's gonna take. Because then the fee not to exceed is already incorrect. If we have to,
Correct, that's what I'm saying, leave it in here, so that in case we do need it, it's in the not to exceed number. So if we make them go through schematic design, and again, I get still hung up on that we don't have an architect, but if we put it in that it's part of their responsibility, then they have to do it in this not to exceed number.
You don't think that this 8.1.1 will cover that enough?
Not if you've gotten rid of all the things we've struck. But, so how does this sound?
I-
Do we think we really need Vertex for the finishing of the schematic that Context is going to assume Context is the architect firm? So we really are comfortable with Vertex kind of starting with design development?
Yeah, but again, I'm hung up on the fact that we don't have.
But we might by the end of the night.
Okay, then I'll stop. But here,
can I make a suggestion?
yeah,
How about we revisit this
I was just gonna say the same thing.
at the end of the evening if we don't have a
Okay.
consensus on the designer selection process?
okay, but can I throw one more in that?
Sure.
Spark this, 8.2.1.0, the OPM shall assist the owner in the negotiation of the design contract. So do we want to cross that out, or do we want to hold them to making the
Well,
fee
they clearly
negotiation.
haven't signed on for that when you look at this.
They have not.
They have not, no.
Okay, so are we comfortable doing that as a committee? Because we haven't negotiated the fee with,
The OPM is responsible for negotiating the contract.
right, but it's,
That is why we have not
Architect's
been able
contract.
to procure that yet and have meaningful conversations related to that.
so then we can't cross that out.
Mr. Purple, you have a?
Mr. Chairman, might I suggest that you table this item, have the discussion that you have on your agenda regarding the architect? Once that issue is somewhat decided, reconvene this discussion, and this item might take care of itself.
Okay. All right, so moving beyond that section, I'm going to skip to items item 9.2. And this is basic services versus extra services. 9.2.2, they have struck that completely and are not using that as calling that an extra service. 9.2.3 is a rebid. So they placed a phone call to us this afternoon to clarify what they meant by this. They cited the recent rebid of Nantucket Fire, where they were the OPM. The town went out very early on to get funding for the project, and then the costing, due to the fact that it's an island, almost 30 miles out into the Atlantic, came back slightly higher than what town meeting had appropriated. Obviously, we asked all four OPMs that sat before us what they thought of our budget, and I think we got a near consensus from all of them that everyone felt very comfortable working with the budget that had been approved by town meeting, especially the contingency, although they understand that we have little hope or desire to use that contingency, but it's there for the unforeseen. So what this is meant to cover, should there be extenuating circumstances where they have to go out and rebid, and it is at no fault of their own, i.e. there's extenuating circumstances in the market environment, that they would come back to us for that. If you look at the actual fee quote that we had from them, the whole bidding process itself is less than $20,000. So it would be what this item really would mean is some number south of 17,000 if we had to do it and we couldn't prove that the rebid was the result of the OPM's work. I don't know, Mr. Rooney, if you have any thoughts on this particular item?
I was the one who indicated it shouldn't be an extra service, and I understand their comments in the margin. I don't have a problem with leaving that as an extra service, but let's just make sure we hold on to their comments for future, in case we need it in future issues.
Any further thoughts on that item? So we'll keep that as is. The next item is 9.2.6, which relates to consultation work with respect to replacement of work damaged by fire or other casualty during the construction. You can read their comment out in the margin. They would certainly say they'd be involved, but they're trying to distance themselves from any sort of insurance estimation process, et cetera. So I don't know, Mr. Rooney.
Well, I think there's a difference between consulting with us and then being an insurance adjuster, but, I mean, again, leaving their comments in the margin is sufficient insofar as, to the extent that that eventuality happens, it appears that they're willing to consult with us, but they're just not willing to act as an independent adjuster. So as long as they're willing to consult with us based upon that, I don't consider it an extra service, and I think by their comments, they don't either. So, again, I'm comfortable with their comments in the margin, as long as we keep those comments. somewhere in archives somewhere, in case we ever need them.
I believe Mr. Purple, at the very least, has this in his email, so we'll make sure we save a version of the document that's being looked at tonight. Item 9.2.8, I believe, Mr. Rooney, you had struck this one altogether. This appears to be kind of a catch-all, saying,
That's why I struck it, yeah. I mean, he says he rejected this one, we can discuss. Essentially, he's saying that anything that isn't in this contract then is going to be an extra service. To me, it would just seem so broad that I don't want to get into a dispute with them saying, well, that's an extra, that's an extra, that's an extra. That's why I struck it. I understand why they want it in. I don't know if it's such that they are adamant that it has to stay in, but that's why I suggested it should not be it should not be an extra.
so, if we struck it and there was a service that's not contemplated in here, wouldn't we then need to go through an addendum process on this versus monitoring a budget? I guess that's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on what that service would be. I mean, obviously, we want to get off to a good start with them and have a good dialogue such that we never encounter this type of a conflict. Yes, to the extent it's a large activity, it's going to be part of the addendum. I don't think we can anticipate it because we're trying to anticipate everything here. I just don't, like I said, want to be in a situation where all of a sudden they say, well, that's an extra, we have to start, that's not included in the contract. That was my concern.
I could see why they would want this in here. I think I would too if I had a not to exceed number in there, because if you didn't and they were just gonna bill a salary, they wouldn't care, because they just
Yeah.
bill you. But they've got a cap here. To me, this is the key. This is, this is gonna be attached to it, right? So
Yeah.
this to me is really spells out what they're gonna do more so than even what you see in here. So I could see why they want it in here.
Me too.
I think if you were their attorney, you might tell them to put it in
Absolutely.
there.
Yeah.
So do we want to push back on this one, or
I'm comfortable with Kathy's analysis in terms of they're doing the time and expense. We know what's going to be. The budget is part of the contract. And hopefully we don't have to get into a discussion about arguing as to whether or not certain activity is an extra or not.
All right, moving on to reimbursable expenses. We touched on this a little earlier. They had proposed submitting their expenses of their subcontractors to us with a 10% markup. Mr. Rooney struck the plus 10%. They are agreeable to that approach. They may ask the town to pay certain invoices directly if and only if it becomes a burden on their office overhead, which I think is a reasonable request, but I think it assures us of no markup. They were very quick to point out that other vendors that may come before us with contracts, namely the designer, may propose the same thing. And I quickly reminded them that they'll be negotiating that contract. So if that's a term that we're abiding by here, that they have their own options as they represent us going forward. Is there any further comment on that item? All right, Article 11, release and discharge on page 16. Mr. Rooney, I think it would probably be helpful for just all of us to understand the rationale behind striking this, pros, cons, et cetera.
Yeah, well, let me just qualify my statement in that to the extent that Aldo says that it's acceptable and it's good for the town to be in there, then I would take out my suggestion that it be stricken. The only thing I didn't like is the language, the way that it's worded. I don't want to be in a position whereby we are done with the OPM and then we get a claim sometime thereafter and they say that, wait a minute, because you made the final payment to us, you have released all future claims against us. I don't think that that's what it says, but the language to me is gray enough such that I'd want council to comment on that. That was
Right.
my concern.
So we'll, am I hearing we'll leave that open for council's judgment?
Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Article 14 is indemnification language. They are not able to approve of this, of course, without their own counsel. I would defer to town council on this item as well, just to negotiate that
Agreed.
term. Article 15, Mr. Rooney, you added multiple references to naming us as the additional insured, us meaning the town. I think they cleaned it up and just added it in point 15.1 instead of adding it a few times here throughout this section.
I'm good with their revision. In other words, for every insurance policy that they get for this project, we will be named as an additional insured in case there's any claims. It just gives us a protection above and beyond the indemnity protection. Gives
So-
us another level of protection, I should say.
So then, skipping to attachment A, which is the financial piece of this, which is the payment schedule. In here, it very clearly lists the amount not to exceed. It lists the billing rates that they have proposed for the project, which is the basis for the spreadsheet in front of you. Mr. Rooney added language that the rates shall remain in effect through the life of this contract. They have come back and asked for a 3-year term on those rates, just in case there's some unforeseen circumstance that this project goes much longer than 3 years. My particular view on this is we start paying rent to St. Mark's in 3 years, so we have a lot more incentive than just these rates in front of us to be done in less than 3 years. And we all know the cost of construction and all of that. So I'm amenable to their compromise. I don't know if anyone else has any further thoughts on that.
I think that's very fair. I mean, 3 years is a long time to hold rates.
And that was the substance of the comment. So I guess, Ms. Cook, did we cover off everything that you had referenced before?
Yes, and I'm sorry I was being redundant.
No, you have to go through it a few times, I feel like, to have a full appreciation for the nuts and the bolts. So,
But one more comment, to go back to Mike's concern, and I heard what Mark said. So there's one thing we're not really focused on, I think, regardless of whether, even if we pick context. So we don't have listed on here that they're going to negotiate the architect's contract. So they've got an argument that they're gonna get paid more for that. So we've got to get it here, I think.
In here.
It's in here, but it's not in here. So I think we've got to try to get them to add that to this spreadsheet without,
I could be mistaken, and maybe I just misheard on the phone, but I believe they included that in design development item 1 in terms of their hours.
okay?
It is not very clear based on their description, so I think we should just, that's probably a clarifying item. And then in their notes, it says it assumes the town will continue working with context and move directly to design without a new designer selection. I think they know that they're on the hook for negotiating the architect, and that's quite honestly why we haven't taken any action at this point, but maybe we can ask them to add that.
And see, I thought so too, I went back and said, well, where is it then? So that's
I
my
think it was a
problem is.
verbal
okay.
comment, and it wasn't very clear in writing.
What section was that in, Jason, you said? One what?
I thought, at least according to my notes, it was in design development on the Excel spreadsheet.
But here's where we.
Item
think it is.
1.
We just don't know for sure, so we just want them to clarify that it's in item 1 of design development on the spreadsheet.
Thank you.
So, I think where we're at, except for the section on feasibility and schematic design, I think the committee sounds like they are in favor of the general context of the agreement, subject to town council review. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna table further discussion on this agenda item, move on to our next agenda item, and then come back to item 3, which is the OPM contract, once we complete the next item. That good for everyone? All right, so our next agenda item is discussion of next steps related to the architect selection process. So in Kathy's opening in summary of the meeting, it was very clear from Mr. Lemieux that this committee should be signaling our intention sooner rather than later with desires to have them either engage with context on contract negotiations or whether we want to go through a designer selection process, which my understanding would be very similar to what we all just went through over the past month and a half to 2 months in terms of the OPM, in terms of the 30-day bid, et cetera. So realizing that just over half of the members up here sat on the Public Safety Study Committee and worked pretty closely with Context, formerly known as Donovan Sweeney. I think it would be important just for anyone that feels like sharing an opinion one way or another, just share your opinion of the working relationship with them and any indication that you have of whether you want to direct the OPM to see if we can't reach favorable contract terms or whether you want to see maybe what else is out there. Mr. Wood, do you want to start?
Sure. Initially, Context Donovan Sweeney wasn't my initial first choice for when we hired them. I was swayed towards the end. I thought they were great. I thought they went above and beyond most of the things we asked, and they were really awesome to us. I would have no problem using them again, and I would recommend using them. If we did go out to bid again, how much delay would that, if we did decide, the rest of the committee decided that we wanted to interview other firms, would that delay us a month?
Well, it's at least 30 days that the bid has to be posted, and then we'd have to go through everything we just did with the OPM. So let's just say we got 7 firms that come in. We'd have to whittle it down to how many we're going to bring in for interview, conduct an interview, select a finalist, then go through the same procurement process that we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes.
Let's just say that even if I still had the same skepticism I did when we first started working with them, I wouldn't want to delay the project a month and a half. Due to that, I thought they were pretty good. So that's my opinion.
I mean, I think a month and a half is generous. I think it's
I do too.
2.5 to 3 months.
I wouldn't even want to delay it 2 or 3 more weeks. We're at that time, it's already ticking. So.
But you're also just talking about the delay of the selection of them, a new one. I mean, there's the learning curve that a new architect's gonna have to pick up on. And they're gonna have to become educated with all the things that Context has been educated with up until this point, is my tag on with that.
And Vertex already been working with them. They have a history. I think it's a no-brainer to keep them.
Mr. Barry, do you have any further thoughts?
I agree. I think they were really easy to work with. Very impressed with everything they did. I don't have any complaints in anything that they did. So I really look forward to hopefully keeping them as our architect.
So I was not part of the original selection. I was not on the committee at the time when the Public Safety Study Committee selected Donovan Sweeney for the feasibility, but I would say that their work over the 3 months leading up to town meeting, while there are many factors that led to a very successful vote, their ability to work with others, meaning other committees, other consultants, and not necessarily, I'll call it wear their brand, but more, think about putting themselves kind of on this side of the table in their client's shoes, really stood out. The principal, Jeff Shaw, was phenomenal. He oftentimes attended meetings that we didn't contract him for. He didn't bill us for, but he was kind of there, if we needed that extra help from a professional level as we were making presentations to various boards and committees. So while I think the timing really concerns me about going out to rebid, I think above all that, I think they performed well enough to be given the opportunity to continue with the town. Regardless of which way we go, I do think there's always healthy critique and debate on designs that will continue. I know there was healthy debate leading right up until town meeting of the building's too big, there should be building over the apparatus bays, many concerns that the prior Public Safety Study Committee heard many times. I think my next agenda item is going to be more of a public outreach thing. I think that's really where we're going to have to make sure that we don't get stuck on exactly what the design was for town meeting, but what the best design is for the town going forward once we get to this next phase. And I think Jeff and Ellen, who are our project team, were amenable to change and weren't stuck on one design or another, and oftentimes brought us choices. And it usually was none of the three choices they brought us. It was usually a combination of A, B, and C, if any of you remember some of the numerics we got into. The other thing I just wanted to say, because I know Mr. Lyons isn't here tonight, but he's been on record at numerous public safety building committee meetings and public safety study committee meetings, is he lived through a building project with Context, which was formerly known as Donovan Sweeney. And when we hit, I'll call it, our darker days in our relationship early on in the public safety study committee, John, cautioned us that there was, light at the end of the tunnel, and that we would really see that team shine. And he, I feel like every meeting, but probably every other meeting, really highlighted that team, that we actually worked with that same team. That's the same team that led to a very successful construction in Weston of their police station. So I think those are all factors that our newer members that weren't part of necessarily the original selection process, but if there's anything you want to add, kind of is the newcomers, or anything you saw that we should all be considering. I think now would be the time to raise any questions, comments, or concerns for all of us. Mr. Rooney or Ms. Cook, if you have any.
All I would say is you guys have been very clear about your opinion of this architect firm. No, I've heard really nothing bad whatsoever. You've got an architect on your committee who certainly can talk their language, and he seems to think that they are top-notch. So let me add one more detail I meant to add before. Does everybody realize that not only are we expected to start digging in April, that the town road project is starting at the same time? So this is really going to be tricky to do all this, move the two holes in the golf course, whatever. So, these people, you're happy with these people. So I have heard nothing to say that you should go any other way. I mean, it sounds like it really is the right decision.
Mr. Rooney, any comments?
Yeah, I wouldn't dictate the decision just based solely on time. I mean, if they weren't the right fit, then I think the town should be willing to take the amount of time necessary to get the right fit. But from everything that I've heard, based upon the extensive interaction that your prior committee had with them, that they are the right fit for us. And they have the relationship with the project manager. They have the relationship with us. They know about the golf course issues. They know about the Main Street construction issues. So to the extent that I can have any input, not having really worked with them directly, it sounds to me like they're the right fit.
I just want to throw one more thing out there. Jason said they were amenable to change. Not only were they amenable to making changes, they were making changes for us the nights of meeting and being able to bring us new designs. They understand the project. I think they'll hit it out of the park on this. Again, I think it's a no-brainer.
Agree with that.
Are there any motions on the table?
I make a motion to, I'm trying to think of how to word this, to recommend Context, formerly known as Donovan Sweeney, to continue on as our firm. architect firm?
Designer.
Designer?
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Is the motion to, is it the motion to make a recommendation that the selectmen enter into a contract with them, or what? I just don't know what the specificity of the motion should be.
I think we need to be more specific. So I guess what I'm gonna ask Mr. Wood to do is to withdraw his motion.
Withdraw my motion.
And then, I think it needs to be more specific along the lines of
Not going up. to bid?
subject to the owner's project manager entering into successful contract negotiations. I think that has to be part of it. I think all we are doing is signaling to the owner's project manager, once this contract is signed, that we would like them to try to reach a contract with context, bring it back to us, as opposed to them drafting bid specifications to go out for a design selection process. I know, Mr. Purple, if you have any other further insight on that based on your discussions with the Attorney General's office? Okay, so Mr. Wood made a motion, Mr. Barry seconded it, Mr. Wood withdrew it.
Yes. Let someone else make that motion again, so I can write it down and pay much closer attention this time.
Mr. Rooney?
I'd move that this board authorize Vertex to enter into contract negotiations with Context Architecture, and to bring back to the town a negotiated contract with regards to the design aspect of this project.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Cook seconds. Is there any discussion on that matter?
Mostly, I'll pick you up again.
All ready for a vote?
Are we asking Vertex to negotiate with the architect through design services?
We have to. The owner's project
Yeah,
manager
no,
has
I'm just
to-
trying to understand that's what we're asking them. How you worded it.
Don't ask me to repeat it because I'm not really sure.
I vote to authorize Vertex to enter into contract negotiations with Contact and report back to Tim.
With regard to the design of the project.
All right, so Mr. Rooney made the motion, Ms. Cook seconded it. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion? None opposed, so vote carries unanimously. So we will return to item 3, which is the update on the OPM contract. So I think all matters have been principally agreed to, subject to legal counsel review for recommendation of the Board of Selectmen. I think what I will propose we do to eliminate any confusion, both between the Excel spreadsheet and the document in front of us in terms of section 8.2.1, is that we have them amend that section to indicate that they will undertake and take responsibility for contract negotiations related to the design process. And I'm hoping that that kind of meets the middle ground on the discussion we had at length earlier. Does that, am I misinterpreting?
Can we say negotiate all contracts with the designers? Just if we're gonna go through
What, I guess, what other contracts are you,
CD, I'm kind of hung up on whether or not construction is gonna be included in context's initial. So I want design services to include construction from the architect. So design services has to encompass, or just say all contracts.
so what you're saying is that when they go out and negotiate with context, that you want the contract that they bring back to include not only the design, but also the construction phases. So basically the
Correct.
all-in for the
Correct.
architect,
Correct.
So construction docs too.
Construction,
right? Because they're gonna be on site during construction too.
construction documents and construction are two different things. And I just want that.
So do you expect the architects to do any type, is the OPM taking the place of the architect actually monitoring construction, or are they going to be there too?
They'll be there too.
Okay.
They'll be there.
It should be both. Okay, so is there any, Mr. Rooney?
Question, Mike, why would we not include those both? Is there a reason that we wouldn't include those both?
I just want to make sure it's clear
Okay.
that design includes construction,
Management.
so that Vertex doesn't have to go back and do with them what we're proposing we do with them.
So you just want one contract in soup to nuts?
That includes construction, yeah, that they're gonna,
So basically through closeout, right, of the project?
correct.
All right,
But Jason, don't you still think we should go back and have them add this to one on the spreadsheet?
yeah, so I think
Yes.
it's two additions. And you strike most of this 8.2 section. You replace it with one paragraph detailing out the, that the contract will be from design through closeout, and the amended, rates and hours through design include the fact that they're gonna have to go out and negotiate a contract. They seem to indicate that it is not an extensive process, but I will defer to them until they come back to us.
Maybe I missed something, but I thought that was already included under design development one.
Jason thinks so too, that they said verbally. I'm
Yes.
just saying, don't you want it, don't you want them to make sure it's in there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
we're gonna have them add it into the Excel
Into the notes section, perhaps?
or right up in the actual body of the table,
Okay,
just for clarity.
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, design's the only operative word in that, the only operative noun, so.
All right, so does anyone want to bring forward a motion related to the OPM contract?
Seeing no volunteers, I'd move that this board recommend to the Board of Selectmen that they enter into a contract with Vertex to act as the operator's project manager for this project pursuant to the draft document that we've discussed this evening and the Excel spreadsheet which would be attached thereto.
Is there a second?
Second.
Contract.
All right, so for purposes of discussion,
Who seconded? I'm sorry.
Kathy?
we just have to, I think you said operators project
Oh, did
manager,
I?
just
Okay.
we'll seek an amendment related to owner's project manager, and I also think we need to amend it to say something along the lines of subject to town council's final edits, because I imagine that will be a question that comes from the Board of Selectmen.
Sure, you want me to try it again?
Yeah.
Make a you got something?
Do you want to withdraw your
I'll
motion?
withdraw it.
Okay,
What I had done was a motion for the Board of Selectmen to enter into a contract with Vertex to operate as the owner's project manual according to the draft contract, subject to town council. I'll find it. Is that good enough?
that's, I think, what we're trying to get to, so you're making them,
Well, I was just saying what I had written down, so if you wanna make that motion, it'd make my life a
Sure,
lot easier.
sure, let me try it again. I'd move that this board make a recommendation that the Board of Selectmen enter into a contract with Vertex Companies as the owner's project manager for this contract pursuant to the draft document in front of us this evening, subject to final review by town council.
There's a second.
Second,
Ms. Cook seconds. Is there any discussion on that?
yes, I think there's one more little inconsistency, which I forgot was here. If we go back to the spreadsheet, look at their footnote 4, assumes designer would be completing all construction meeting minutes.
So you're saying the inconsistency here between what's in the,
Yeah,
we just need the wording to match up.
yeah. So who's, because didn't we a few minutes ago decide that Vertex was doing the minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been looking on here to see who that person was gonna be. And it's probably not here because, well, it may be in the contract, but I think this doesn't necessarily reflect that.
So, someone can correct me procedurally here, but I think that's a comment we can go back to with our other edits to the table that we asked for them to edit, because I think that's just part of the discussion we've had tonight and encompassed within Mr. Rooney's motion, unless anyone disagrees.
We can go back to that in our discussion of 8.1.3, I think. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, it's just getting the two to tie together. Because what Mr. Rooney and Ms. Cook mentioned was that in the meeting, they were very clear that they weren't taking minutes. The footnote in the Excel spreadsheet says that they're not taking minutes, but the contract said that they were, which Mr. Rooney then commented, I thought you weren't taking minutes, which one is it? So they've actually agreed to now take the minutes without updating.
And again, maybe it's design and construction are the two words here that are throwing everybody off, because they say they're not gonna take construction meeting minutes.
But we're not agreeing to the construction phase yet.
Do you want to amend that to according to amended draft contract? Would that tie the two together enough? And amend-
I personally think it's covered, but I'll defer to,
You think it's covered because of what Mike just said, which is, this says construction meeting minutes? with
no,
the-
sorry. I think there's an inconsistency between the contract and the Excel document that we'll be doing budget to actuals against. I think we're on record as saying that inconsistency needs to be cleaned up. So I think and I think that the motion that Mr. Rooney made covers the fact that there are some cleanup edits that need to be made in addition to final town council review. So what I'm thinking is that the motion as presented is okay, but it is incumbent upon either myself as chair or the town administrator to work with Vertex to clean up the inconsistencies and vet it by Mr. Rooney and Ms. Cook to make sure that it now all ties together, given the conversations that they were part of. So I think for purposes of the minutes, John, I would just add that discussion in there, so we're on the record as stating as such. Is there any further conversation on Mr. Rooney's motion? All those in favor? I see none opposed. Vote carries unanimously. So related to that, we are on the agenda for Board of Selectmen tomorrow morning. My intent, unless Mr. Rooney or Ms. Cook would like to, was to go live, my intent was to submit a brief letter just stating, again, the process, very similar to what I did last time, as I will be out of state. So I don't know what this committee's desire is to send a live representative if available, or if you'd rather just go with the letter format. I think the only benefit of a live person being there, Mr. Purple will be there, is just to answer any questions that the board may have that we have not covered.
I went to the last one, not for that, for a different reason, and they didn't have any questions. It went really fast. They read into the record your email, and they were done.
Do you want to go, or are you available to go?
I am not available to go.
No, no,
All right, so then the chair will submit a letter. Mr. Purple has been part of all the conversations. He can answer questions, and should the board not feel comfortable with anything that is presented in front of them, the default will be, we're on their agenda for the following Tuesday, the 8th, which is their regularly scheduled meeting, of which I'll be planning to make a update on where we're at as an overall committee, regardless of what happens with the OPM contract tomorrow. Just for optics, 5-10 minute update. I will post a meeting for our committee for that night in case we do have a quorum there. The last item I just wanted to talk about very briefly, and I think it's going to continue to come up, is I think we're going to start to get into the process where obviously we report to the Board of Selectmen, but there are going to be other committees that have a vested interest in the developments on our project, both, I'll call it regulatory and permit granting boards in this town, but also financial oversight boards, i.e. the advisory committee. So we do have an advisory committee representative on this committee. Kathy, I don't know how often advisory is planning to meet into the fall. I know you usually have a busier season come winter. But I just wanted to, we did this with the Public Safety Study Committee, so I just didn't want to take anything for granted. But what I found worked well was we would oftentimes, I would reach out to the chairs of other committees and respectfully ask to give an update on our project to try to be ahead of certain issues and not have anyone chasing us and really us be the ones chasing others. And what that did by posting meetings when we were actually granted and put on the agenda, which everyone always wanted to hear from us, was the ability for not just the chair to represent his views, but any other committee member as stuff, especially if we hit any controversial issues, for you to present your issues. My role as chair is obviously to present the prevailing view of the committee, but should there be items that become contentious, I do want to be thinking about the process that we're going to use to update other town boards and committees. So I think in the short term, I think we owe advisory a more comprehensive update on what we've been doing, where we're at. I would certainly like Ms. Cook, your ideas on how best to do that, whether it's through you as our liaison or whether it's a joint meeting for 15 minutes at the start of a future meeting. And then I think we should start to get ahead of the planning and conservation processes, not until we have an architect and OPM on board, but thinking through whether those boards in Board of Health, whether they would entertain, I'll call it a discussional meeting of some of the thoughts, what we're trying to do, and just kind of get any run-of-the-mill discussional feedback before we head into the official processes. And along those lines, I think it's becoming upon us to reach out to the abutters and any other residents that are interested in town and hold some sort of open forum for them to at least air their feedback and let at least our new owner's project manager hear some of the views and concerns of the town's residents, some carrying more weight than others that we need to balance, against the overall project. But I think by having that forum, it gives optically the view that we're open to feedback, et cetera. So I would like to schedule that in the fall at some point, but I'm looking really for guidance from this committee on how you want to handle other committees, but also public outreach as we're quickly approaching the fall. Do you want to start with maybe the advisory perspective?
So advisory intends, I believe, to have a standing agenda item that will allow me to update the committee every time. And we're actually going to try to meet every 2 weeks and do things a little bit faster than we normally do. So we hope to have that on there. It's not on this one Wednesday for some reason, but it's supposed to be there. So that should help, that I've got the ability to update. But I do think they're definitely going to want to hear from all of you at some point. So we definitely should do that also. And then maybe you know, maybe once in the fall, maybe once, this off the top of my head, maybe once the architect is on board, that'd be a good time to come in and say, you know, we're really off to the races at this point, and kind of spell out the timeline as to what you think it is. But no, they definitely would want to see you once or twice before we start digging.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
I want to do it before budget season really gets
Yeah,
flying, too, though.
yeah, no, I agree, the fall should be a good time to do the one.
Well, somewhere in the fall, we're gonna have our, if we do the 1 or 2 cost estimates of this, so we could either do it before any cost estimates in hand, or we do the DD cost estimate, and that's when we can sit with advisory.
That's a great idea, because
Something to hold on
numbers
to.
are pretty important, right?
It's something to
So
hold on
I
to.
think that they would like to maybe see it when there really is, you know, when you can say, yeah, 22.6 is more than we need.
For me now, right?
More than we need. So, yeah, I think that's probably a really good idea. Wait till you've got the first, you know, detailed cost estimate. The architects on board then come in and say, this is what it looks like,
And that's,
time-wise and cost-wise.
and that's probably before Thanksgiving,
Yeah, so that'd be a good time.
so.
So, does it make sense to, for me to reach out, to just try to get on the agenda once before the fall, to just provide here's where we're at? Because I think advisory's oversight is beyond financial, right? It's operational, right, too? And if there's, things that they're seeing that we're doing that don't necessarily line up with any one of the 9 members' expectations, or I guess there's 8 now, but, it would be nice to hear that up front, as opposed to it come up as part of the back end of a permitting meeting or something that maybe isn't directly related. So, with this committee's approval, what I would like to do is maybe do one presentation update, then defer to Ms. Cook for like interim updates, that, we wouldn't necessarily be a posted part of your agenda, like we wouldn't post a separate meeting, with an intention of coming back in November and make sure that that meets advisory's needs. Is that the right way to do it?
Sounds like a good idea to me.
Okay. So what about, I'll call it more the inspectional permitting boards in town? I don't know whether they would accept or want to talk to us at this point, but I have seen them have informal discussions before, a true application or permit was issued. If they were willing to entertain a discussion on that, shoot for early fall on that, once we maybe have an OPM, an architect. Does that sound like the right timeline? Given that their agendas are posted so far in advance, I'm going to plan to reach out now, and maybe they can give us some direction on what they would maybe want to hear or not hear, and they may just say, we're not ready to talk to you, we can't talk to you, we don't want to talk to you for X, Y, or Z reason. But I think that outreach is at least setting the right tone. And then what do we think about public outreach? So really, obviously our meetings are posted public. It's summer, people are on vacations, but I think once school is back and people are fully back in town, how would you propose conducting some sort of public outreach forum? Do we just have it as an agenda item for one meeting and allot certain amount of time with a specific focus on public outreach at that point in time? Or what do we see work or not work as part of at least the feasibility phase?
Go ahead, John. Go ahead. I thought the library forum that we had worked out really well last year. I think we could plan on a time, once we get more closer to the numbers and start getting closer to design, have an update with a presentation at the library.
Mr. Rooney?
Yeah, my only thought is, we don't want to do it too prematurely until we get the information, I think, back from the architect, so that we can actually give them some substantive information. So I don't know what that timeline looks like, assuming the contract between the OPM and the architect happens, and then once the drawings start coming back, I think that may be the time to at least give them something. Second question I had is, this committee has nominated me as the liaison to the golf course committee. Mr. Purple, has that committee been formed? Is that an existing committee at the golf course committee? August 8th? Okay.
And I plan to submit a letter on behalf of the committee saying that we voted unanimously nominated you as our liaison to that.
And the other item, Jason, that I know is on the list, but I don't know if it's been mentioned yet, is there needs to be at some point a meeting or coordination with the Main Street construction project. And that's going to be a significant item on our agenda moving forward. And I don't know if that's too early at this point to start talking about phasing issues. It might be, but it might not be. I don't know.
Well,
I think we just gotta get Karen Gallagher involved. I agree with you. I was gonna mention that one too, that, you know, she really, I think she at least needs to, maybe you and Karen stay in touch as far as what's going on, because, I think it is important she's involved. I think this is where I think she should be involved all the way through, so she really knows what's intended here.
I do think it would be Karen and Mark's responsibility to bring the OPM up to speed, because I think that project has a very definitive timeline at this point. While we have full aspirations to have shovels in the ground in the spring, a lot's gonna depend on how quickly we get through design, what hurdles we run into in the permitting process, and ultimately how long the bidding process takes and what comes back. So, do you think that's better for that conversation to just occur between the OPM and Karen offline, or should we ask Karen to come to our meeting just to bring everyone up to speed in conjunction, and I'll give the option to the Main Street Working Group as well to join us? What do you think plays better in terms of a venue?
My thought is that it would be important to have the OPM present at that meeting, because they obviously going to have a lot of knowledge that I don't think this committee possesses with regards to phasing type of concerns and issues. So maybe having them come to one of our meetings where we have on the agenda the Main Street construction project.
I mean, my expectation is that the OPM will be coming to all of our posted meetings unless there's some extenuating circumstances. So, I guess once we get through the contract phase, what I'll do is ask the OPM to kind of come up with a project schedule that they can present to us at our next meeting, which is the 14th, so 2 weeks from tonight. And at that point in time, we can then start to think about the various constituencies that should be coming in after that fact to kind of help vet that schedule and work through it. Realizing that we have just moved Context forward as the potential designer of the project, subject to contract negotiations, I do foresee a potential need of adding another meeting between the 14th and the 28th. We can table that discussion for now, or we can agree to just schedule a meeting on that 21st. But I believe the Board of Selectmen are committed to holding administrative meetings to the extent that they can get a quorum to continue to advance contracts as we have them. I think that the architectural contract is the last major one. I don't know if we'll be in a good spot by the 21st, but I think the second that we have the architect on board, we should all be meeting and really sketching out where we're going with this, because I think that's what we're all anxious to get moving towards. So do you want to schedule the 21st or some other night that week, given that that wasn't an originally scheduled week, or you want to come back to me on schedules within the next week or so?
I'm okay with the 21st.
I am not.
Is it the whole week, or is it?
No, I'm back the 22nd, so I'm gone that Monday.
I'm okay with the 22nd.
I think I'll be gone the 21st as well.
Is any night better during the week for you, Kathy?
Why don't I, because we also have 3 members that aren't here tonight. So I'm here in the 24th, sorry, I'm looking the wrong, 21st is out. So what I'll do is I'll try to find a mutually agreed upon date, because we're gonna have to also see what the OPM's availability, et cetera, and maybe context as well. And then I think we'll hopefully go to, we won't be having to meet as regularly. Once we get that process underway, then they can be coming back to us with reports and the heavy lifting in between the meetings.
I'm wide open now.
Okay. All right, so I will solicit availability from the committee. Are there any other business anyone wants to conduct this evening?
One more, this, I think it falls under this. So my major concern is the golf course. I am having trouble figuring out how the golf course stays open. If you have to move the 2 holes before you can keep the golf course open, I would think you've got to start moving the 2 holes pretty soon after this season ends, November, whatever. And there's no money to do that. There won't be any money unless there's a special town meeting until next July 1st, as far as that goes. We can't use any of the 22.6 for that. So I'm hoping the committee, John, can come up with some ways to figure out how to do this. There may be a couple ways to do it, but that to me is kind of the critical path as far as fulfilling the promise that was made at town meeting that we keep the golf course running during construction. So I just don't know what the solution is to that.
I think that committee has a lot of work to do right upon formation to come back with answers to that question. I think it's a very valid concern. There any other items? Before we take a motion to adjourn, I just want to thank Mr. Rooney and Ms. Cook for taking the time out of their busy professional lives to get back in front of this committee so quickly with something that we could really work with and talk through. And I think the pace that we're working and the tone that we're setting for the town is a good one in terms of how focused this committee is in the respective members on the project. So thank you for doing that. Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.